All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's live Q&A session. My name is Johan Bestbier. I'm the product specialist at Sakata Seed Southern Africa. I'm responsible for all root and bulb crops, namely onions, carrots, radishes, beetroot, turnips, and bunching onions. However, today I will only be discussing some basic principles and backgrounds of onions. Goeiemôre almal, my naam is Johan Bestbier. Ek is die gewasprodukspesialist by Sakata Seed Suid-Afrika. Welkom by hierdie regstreekse vraag en antwoord sessie. Ek is verantwoordelik vir alle bol, knol en wortelgewasse. Dit sluit in beet, eie, wortels, radyse, rape en ook lente-eie. Firstly, I would just like to mention that all the contact details of our distributors, where you can acquire our vegetable seed, is on our website. Thus, please visit www.sakata.co.za and follow the link of contact. Under contact, you will see there's a map showing each country in Africa, and just go to the distributor closest to you. During this session, I will discuss some basic backgrounds of the questions I received. So at the end of the session, I will just go through some of the questions if I've missed anything. I would like to start off this session with some very important terminology commonly used in onions. The first term is photoperiod. Photoperiod, or day length, is the duration from sunrise to sunset, and photoperiod differs from different latitudes. Photoperiod, or day length, is a very important factor in onions, and onions are commonly classified into three categories based on the photoperiod they require for bulb initiation. The first one is short day onions. Short day onions require a photoperiod, or day length, of 10 to 12 hours to initiate bulbing. These onions are commonly grown from the latitude lines of 0 to 35. That is from the equator, which is 0 to the 35 latitude line. Thus, shorter onions can be produced through the entire Africa and also the regions above the equator. The second class of onions are intermediate day onions. These onions require a day length of between 12 to 14 hours to initiate bulbing. They are commonly grown from the 28 latitude line to the 42 latitude line. In other words, these onions can only be produced south or below this latitude line. This line goes through the Kimberley area, the central region of South Africa. Thus, intermediate day onions commonly cannot be produced in areas north of this line, thus between the equator and the 28 latitude line. The last class of onions is long day onions. These onions require a day length of more than 14 hours, usually between 14 and 16 hours. As said, these onions cannot be produced in South Africa, as the longest average day length in South Africa is only 14.33 hours. Thus, the day length in South Africa or any other African country is too short to initiate bulbing for long day onions. Just on short day and intermediate day onions also, short day onions are commonly referred to as fresh onions, as these onions don't have a very long storage potential. They have higher sugar contents and lower pyruvate levels. Thus, these onions, after harvesting, they cannot be stored for very long periods and need to be marketed almost immediately. Whereas intermediate onions has lower sugar levels and higher pyruvate levels, and thus can be stored for longer periods. This is quite an advantage for intermediate day onions, or as they call them, storage onions, Cape onions, as they can be stored for a long period and only be used and sent to the market when the price is right. The second term which I would like to discuss today is bulbing. The term bulbing refers to the process of bulb initiation and bulb development in onions. This is as the sugars and water accumulates in the leaf bases which make up the onion bulb. The base of the onion plant visibly becomes or swells, and you can see that bulb initiation has started. Onions, or any other plant for that matter, uses phytochromes to monitor the day length of a day. That is the exposure of light and darkness. However, in onions, the primary signal for which guides an onion to bulb initiation or bulb production is day length. Day length, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, different from different regions. When a certain day length is reached, it will initiate an onion plant to bulb. This critical value or day length differ from different varieties. Some varieties require a shorter day length to initiate bulbing, whereas other varieties require a later or longer day length to initiate bulbing. Bulbing in onions is affected by a few factors. The most important one is day length. The second most important one is temperature. The third one is variety selection. Fourth is sowing date, and 5 is altitude. Now, temperature plays a very important role in bulbing of onions, as it determines the rate at which an onion bulbs. So the warmer the temperature or higher the temperature, it can actually accelerate the rate at which an onion plant bulbs. At higher temperatures, bulbing will be accelerated, and at lower temperatures, bulbing will be slower. During high temperatures can actually also influence the amount of day length an onion required to bulb. Temperatures of between 25 to 28 can actually decrease the minimum critical value of day length required by onion for bulb initiation. The last term which I would like to discuss is called bolting. So bolting is the production or formation of a seed stem or flower stalk. There are multiple factors which can actually affect the formation of a flower stem stalk in vegetable crops. However, for onions, the most in onions, a period of cool temperatures between 6 to 13 degrees is the most common trigger for bolting or flower formation. When an onion receives these low temperatures during or prior to bulb initiation, it will actually trigger the plant to start flowering, in other words, bolting, rather than bulbing. So it's very important to differentiate between those two terminologies. Obviously, bulbing is very important. That's what we want in onion production, and bolting is not what we want in onion production for commercial. However, bolting, that's flower production, is very important for seed production. So, how do you know when an onion plant has started bulbing? There are a lot of complicated ways of checking that. However, a general rule of thumb is to check when the maximum diameter of the onion base is twice that of the onion thickness, it marks the date of the start of onion bulbing. All right, onions along with tomatoes and potatoes, even though some people regard potatoes as a starch, it is actually botanically a vegetable crop, but nutritionally it is regarded as a starch. Are the most widely consumed vegetable crops in South Africa. Onions belong to the family Amaryllidaceae, which also include garlic, shallots, and also bunching onions. Onions are biennial crops, meaning it takes 2 years to go from seed to seed. The life cycle of an onion can be characterized into seven main phases. The first one being seeding, followed by vegetative growth, bulb formation, bulb dormancy, bulb sprouting, and then vegetative growth again, and then finally it is a seed formation or bolting. All of these factors are influenced by day length, temperature, latitude and day length is similar, plant population, and sowing date. Obviously, when we commercially produce onions, we are only interested in the bulbs that we consume. So we are only interested in the first 3 stages of this life cycle of an onion. So we focus on seeding, vegetative growth, and bulb initiation and bulb formation. Next, I would just like to discuss sowing dates in onions. Onions are a very tricky and difficult vegetable crop to grow. You can't just plant onions any time of the year and expect a proper yield. There are very specific sowing dates. Now, variety selection and sowing dates play a very important role in onion production, as each variety has a very specific sowing date. For instance, if you want to produce onions in the Northern Cape and you plant the variety too early in the growing season, you will see bolting will be a problem, might be a problem, and also vegetative growth. You will not see decent, proper yields of the bulbs. However, if you plant it too late in the season, you will see premature bulbing and receive a very low yield. In other words, there's a very specific slot for onion, sowing slot for each variety of onion. Now, South Africa has 3 major growing regions for onions. The first is the north, which includes Limpopo province and the Northwest province. The second is the central region, which is the Free State and the Northern Cape. And the third is the Western and Southern Cape. Now, like I mentioned earlier, shorter onions are used in the north of South Africa. They can be used throughout South Africa, so they are used in the Northern Province, Northwest and Limpopo, the central regions, and also in the Cape provinces. So the 3 main regions of South Africa, the sowing date is as follows. For the northern regions, in other words, Limpopo and Northwest, the sowing time is late January till March, and that's only short-day onions. For the central regions of South Africa, you can produce either short-day onions or intermediate-day onions. And sowing time is from April going into June. And then the third region of South Africa, which is the Cape provinces, you can either sow shorter onions or intermediate-day onions. And the sowing time is also April going into July. And then the thing about the Cape province, Western Cape and Southern Cape, is they usually do make transplants. So they produce a seed, grow into seedlings, and then transplant the seedlings. So usually transplanting the seedlings goes from July or August until end of September. This all depends on the type of variety you selected. Either whether it's a short day variety, you're going to sow it earlier, or you're going to plant it earlier, and a later intermediate day variety, you're going to transplant it later in the season. So for sowing, just to mention, the north and the central regions of South Africa make use of direct seeding. So they use planters to do the sowing. Whereas in the Western Cape, they also do direct sowing, however, mostly go from the direct sowing using the transplants to transplant the seedlings. Okay, the next subject I would like to discuss is sowing depth of onion seeds. So the sowing depth of an onion seed depends on a few factors. The first one being the seed size, seed treatment, the climate in which you're going to do sowing, and the soil type, soil structure, and also the irrigation scheme. So different seasons, you're going to sow it in different sowing depths. I mean, soil temperature plays a major role in a sowing depth, so you always need to take that into account. However, a sowing range of between 0.7 centimeters to 1.7 centimeters is a good average there. That range is a good range to work on sowing depth. Next, I would like to mention plant population. So plant population plays a very important role in the bulb uniformity and bulb size you'll receive on the onion. So it's very important to have the correct plant population when producing onions. So the South African market prefer a medium-sized onion. That is an onion between 5 to 7 centimeters in diameter. So to produce an onion with this size, you're going to have a final stand. You will aim to have a final stand of between 700 to 800,000 plants per hectare. That is about 75 to 135 plants per square meter. If you would like to produce larger plants or larger bulbs, like a large onion which is more than 7 centimeters in diameter, you're going to lower your sowing density. So that's going to be more towards the 50 to 75 plants per square meter. So obviously, things to take into consideration with plant population is what size of bulbs you want at the end of the day. If you want larger bulbs, you're going to lower your sowing density. If you're going to want smaller bulbs, you increase your sowing density. The next topic I would like to briefly touch on is onion maturity. Now, onion maturity depends also on various factors. These include, once again, temperature and day length and the variety selected. Onions, depending on the variety selected, whether it's a short day variety, early short day, or intermediate, mid-intermediate day variety, you can work on about 135 to 180 days. Maturity in onions is influenced by multiple factors. These include also fertilizers. So usually when you want to accelerate maturity, you should check that your nitrogen fertilizer is not too high. You should have a high potassium phosphate levels and a proper ratio between potassium to nitrogen fertilizers. And on the other hand, maturity can be delayed by high nitrogen fertilizers and also excessive moisture in the soil. Now, onion maturity is also linked to the soil structure and soil type, as different soil structures and soil types have different moisture levels and soil temperatures. So it's very important to see what type of soil you have. And a sandy soil versus a rocky soil, all of those are important to take into consideration at the end of the day. Next, I would just like to discuss the climatic requirements of onions. Onions are actually a cool season crop. However, in South Africa, we produce onions throughout the year. Germination of an onion seed can take place at temperatures as low as 2 degrees and temperatures as high as 32 degrees. However, this is not the result after temperatures we aim for. The ideal temperature for germination for onion seed is between 11 to 25 degrees, and the ideal temperature for onion growth during the early stages of development is between 10 to 20 degrees Celsius. Now, the ideal temperature for the later growing stages and for bulb initiation in onions is between 22 to 28 degrees Celsius. Like I mentioned earlier, higher temperatures, like the 22 to 28, stimulate bulbing or will speed up onion bulbing, and thus plays an important role at the maturity of the onion. However, temperatures above 31 degrees Celsius will there will be a decrease in the growth rate of an onion. And that's all for climatic requirements. Now, the next thing you also need to consider when looking for a site or a site selection or land selection where you would like to grow your onions, there are a few things to take in consideration when looking for this location. First of all, you need to take consideration the gradient. Gradient should be up to 10 degrees. The slope aspect, preferably a northern-facing slope. The soil type and structure. You want a soil that is nice and deep, and also a soil that can drain easily. Next important thing is irrigation water. You need to see if there's irrigation water close to you, if there's a borehole or a dam or a river or anything like that. It's very important to take that into consideration. And then also the previous crops that were cultivated on the soil, and to take the crop rotation in consideration. Can you produce onions on that soil? What was planted prior to the onions? Onions require a crop rotation of between 3 to 5 years. That's preferred. However, a minimum of 3 years is recommended. And then the last thing to consider when doing a site selection is to see the neighboring crops in the region. I mean, if there's some crops are more prone to carrying disease which affect onions, so just make note of the neighboring crops next to the site you selected. The next topic I'm going to discuss is the soil requirements. Onions are shallow feeders. However, the roots can penetrate the soil up to 65 centimeters. They thrive, They thrive in moist, deep, loose, and well-drained soils. Thus, the soil should be loosened up to 75 centimeters. And the ideal soil type for onions should be the ideal soil type and structure for onions should be a soil that holds sufficient moisture around the root zone during the early root development of the onion and the early growth stages. However, the soil shouldn't hold too much water during bulb expansion and bulb maturity, so that it can cause the onions to rot. Clay soils, so onions can be produced on a wide variety of soils. However, clay soils, problem with clay soils can be waterlogging. So if you do production on clay soils, just see that waterlogging is not an issue. The effect of waterlogging on clay soils can be eliminated or reduced, for that matter, by growing the onions on raised beds. This will just aerate the soil a bit. And gravel and coarse sandy soils are not that suitable for onion production due to the fast drainage of the water and also the leaching of nutrients, especially nitrogen in the soil. It's also recommended to avoid rocky soils, as this will leave blemishes on the onions. I mean, when the onion bulb expands during bulb development and it presses against the rock, you will see the blemish or little dent on the onion. So it's important to, when you do a soil preparation for onions, to loosen the soil at least to a depth of 75 centimeters. It's important to see that the soil is very well draining, and obviously it should be nutrient rich as well. When planting onions on a bed, you just need to make sure that the seed bed is very nice and fine, that there's no clods in the seed bed. This is to ensure that there's a proper contact between the seed and the soil. Proper contact between the seed and the soil will lead to a uniform germination and obviously then to better stand or plant population at the end of the day. Okay, the next topic I'm going to discuss is fertilization in onions. One of the most important thing when looking at fertilizers of any crop is to first do a soil analysis. Now, the soil analysis is very important in order to establish the pH of the soil and also to determine whether you need to add any additional fertilizers to the soil. So onions are very sensitive to pH, and they thrive in a pH of 5.8 to 6.6. This range of pH is the ideal pH for nutrient uptake. So before sowing your onions, you need to see what the pH of your soil is. And if your soil pH is too low, you need to add lime to the soil at least 8 weeks prior to sowing. So the macronutrients for onions are nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. The secondary macronutrients for onions are magnesium, calcium, and sulfate. So the amount of sulfur in your fertilizer program will actually affect the pungency of the onion, as sulfur plays a very important role in pungency of onions. So if you want a very pungent onion, it's important to apply K2SO4 later in the growing season of the onion. The micronutrients of onions include copper, boron, manganese, molybdenum, and iron. Now, onions are very sensitive to micronutrient deficiencies. Micronutrients are best applied to onions via foliar spray. However, some specialists agree that onions are not good candidates for foliar sprays due to the waxy leaves and also due to the upright growth. However, to be successful in foliar sprays in onion production, one needs to have the proper sprayer apparatus, which sprays at high pressures with fine droplets, and also needs a sticker in the spraying water, and also make sure that the pH of the spray water is correct. Now, the basic fertilizer program for onions grown on a loamy to a loamy sand soil with a final expected yield of 45 to 55 tons is as follows. So it's 180 kilograms of nitrogen divided as follows: 60 kilograms broadcasted as a top dressing pre-plant, and 60 kilograms broadcasted at a 2-leaf stadium, and then another 60 kilograms 4 weeks broadcasters after the 2-leaf stadium. 90 to 100 kilograms of phosphate should be applied. Everything should be applied pre-plant, as this will stimulate proper root development in the for the onions. And then lastly, around 180 to 200 kilograms of potassium should be applied. Divided as follows: 110 kilograms pre-plant, and then 70 to 90 kilograms 7 to 8 weeks prior to harvesting. Now, potassium plays a very important role in the quality and the keeping ability of onions. So thus it's very important to have enough potassium in your fertilizer program. Potassium can be applied at the end of the growing season as KNO3 or K2SO4. All right, so just for a small-scale farmer who does not have access to a soil analysis, the following fertilizer program can be followed. Broadcast 1 ton of 2,3,4 fertilizer per hectare pre-plant, and then an additional 130 kilograms of nitrogen 3 weeks after emergence, and then another 130 kilograms of nitrogen 6 weeks after emergence. So if you do cultivation on a more sandy soil where the nitrogen may leach from the soil easily, it's recommended to do an additional 130 to 150 kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer at least 8 weeks prior to harvesting. You will see there's a yellowing of the leaves, then you can know this might be due to the lack of nitrogen. So I would just like to discuss irrigation. Onion roots can penetrate the soil up to a depth of 65 centimeters. However, onions are shallow feeders, and they only feed in the top 30 centimeters of the soil. Thus, it's very important to keep the upper level or the top of the soil moist during root development and the early growth stages of the onion plant. So onions require approximately 500 to 600 millimeters of water during their long growth cycle. Prior to sowing, irrigate the soil to field capacity. So the soil must be wet at least 50 to 60 centimeters deep. And after that, after sowing to seeding, apply 3 to 5 millimeters daily or 25 millimeters weekly. And after the seedling has established, you can apply 35 millimeters of water weekly. When you note that 50% of the onions tops or the leaves have collapsed, you can do a last irrigation and then stop irrigation. Now, obviously, the amount of water that is required by the plant or the water that needs to be applied depends on several factors. This includes soil type. I mean, a clay soil is going to require less water, and sandy soil, gravel soil, is going to require more water. The irrigation system you use, the temperature, temperature plays a huge role in the amount of water you apply. And then lastly, the growth stage at which a crop is. So during bulb initiation for onions, they require more water than, for instance, when seeding, just after seeding. It's very important to keep record of rainwater and to take that in consideration into your irrigation scheme. So you don't want to over-irrigate your crop. I mean, that's a waste of water, firstly. And secondly, you're going to wash away valuable nutrients in the soil. So if you see it's rained, you can just adjust your irrigation accordingly. So the next thing I would like to discuss is harvesting, curing, topping, storing of onions. So you will, after you see this, 60 to 80% of the tops or the leaves of your onions have collapsed in the field. You can, that's an indication that your onion plants has matured and they're going into dormancy. At this stage, you can start harvesting. Harvesting is done either mechanically or by hand. So hand harvesting, you will do an undercut with a blade and then just pull the onions from the soil, or you can take a fork and just loosen the soil and take the onions out. Mechanical harvesting is done by machine. Many times you get specialized onion harvesters, or sometimes they are just modified potato harvesters. So during or after harvesting, a sprout inhibitor can be sprayed if you know you're going to store your onions for a long period of time. This is just to inhibit any sprouting bulbs. So the next, after harvesting, you can cure your onions. Curing or drying of onions is important, as onions comprise of approximately 90% of water, and thus it's important to dry the onions. The objective of drying or curing of onions is to dry the 2 to 4 outer scale leaves and tighten the necks on the bulbs. And also to develop a very attractive, nice brown color on the scale leaves, and also to firm up the bulbs. Drying or curing can be done in various ways. It can be done in the open field, open shed, or by air ventilated, or in a shed with air ventilated airflow. So depending on temperature and airflow and humidity, onions dry in about 2 to 4 weeks and develop a nice brown skin color on that. So when you want to dry your onions in the field, you don't require specialized sheds. You can just harvest the onions, top and tail them. So you pack the leaves over the bulbs in a windrow. So curing can be done by either windrowing or permanent heaps. So by windrowing, you just harvest the onions, top and tail them. That's to pack the bulbs with the leaves of the other onions, to eliminate any sun damage or sun scald on the onions, sunburn. Alternatively, you can pack the onions open, but you need to cover them with grass or straw, anything like that, just to protect them from the sun. The second option is permanent heaps. So what you would do here is you will take a pallet, place it on the floor in the production land. You will pack the onions on that pallet into a heap, cover it with a piece of plastic to protect it from sunburn and also from any rain that might occur during storage. So the pallet will make sure that there's a decent air movement, aeration of the bulbs from the bottom, and the plastic will protect it from the sun and any water. So obviously humidity also plays a very important role in onion storage. So it is important not to have any dew on your onions or rain or irrigation water, as this will also be a very good environment for disease development on onions. So one of the questions also which I received was regarding onion splitting. So onion splitting is a disorder in onions, and it can be caused by multiple factors. These factors include variety. Some onion varieties are more prone to splitting than other onion varieties. Over-fertilization, especially over-fertilization with nitrogen-based fertilizers, and nitrogen fertilizers late in the season. The third factor is uneven or irregular irrigation. Number 4 is temperature fluctuations and sun scald. Number 5 is planting too deep, and number 6 is planting population. So larger onion plants easily produce split bulbs because of the development of more of more leaf bases further away from the apical meristem. So this will cause the bulb to split. So all of these factors can be managed in a production field. I will come to the control of splitting now. I would just like to mention that splitting of the basal plate of the onion may lead to secondary growth from that split, producing small bulbs called bulblets. And this split in the basal plate of the onion may also lead to secondary infections in the onions. And so how can you control splitting of onion bulbs? Well, the first one is to pay attention to seedbed preparation and to use quality seed with a decent germination. This will ensure that you have a very uniform stand or plant population, and it will eliminate larger plants in your production field. The second control method is uniform irrigation and uniform fertilization. So these practices will prevent phases of rapid bulb, will eliminate practices of rapid and slow bulb development. So if you do a regular irrigation, the bulb wouldn't suddenly expand and produce splits. And with fertilizer also, it's important to manage the late applications of onion fertilizer, of nitrogen fertilizers. Okay, let's see what other questions I have here. Okay, the one question which I received is what soil is best to plant onions on? I did touch on that. So you, once again, just briefly, you want a deep soil that is well draining, and the type of soil, you don't want a heavy soil. If you have a heavy soil, you need to do raised beds to eliminate waterlogging. And if you have a sandy soil, you need to adjust your practices by more regular irrigations and fertilization, as drainage is a problem on sandy soils. So the best soil for onions is a loamy soil to a loamy sand soil, as this is for grey structure which doesn't drain too fast and doesn't leach for nitrogen fertilizers from the soil that quickly. The fertilizer program I did discuss, bulb splitting. Another question, what is the best time to plant onions? I did touch on that. It all depends on what region you are cultivating your onions. So once again, if you are cultivating your onions from the equator to the 35 latitude line, you can produce shorter onions. And the best sowing time for them is late January to March. That's now for South Africa. It differs from in different African countries. So, and if you want to plant intermediate day onions for Cape provinces, you're looking for April to June sowings. Here's another question. Can I grow onions in clay soil? Yes, you can grow them on clay soil. You just need to adopt your practices. Like I mentioned, raised bed can eliminate waterlogging, and you need to manage your irrigation carefully because waterlogging is an issue on heavier soils. But yes, onions work well on clay soils. Bulb rotting during storage. So bulb rotting during storage can be eliminated by curing your onions properly before you store them. So if you store an onion that's not cured properly, you will see botrytis nigrot and also black mold on your onions caused by aspergillus. So you can eliminate a lot of these diseases by first of all curing your onions properly before storing them, and secondly, when you top your onions, in other words, when you cut the leaves off your onions, you don't want to cut too close to the neck of the bulb. You want to leave about 2 to 3 centimeters of that leaf attached to the bulb in order for botrytis nigrot not to get into your onion's neck. Okay, let me just check your new questions on Facebook. Wondering if artificial lighting can be used to make up for hours. Yes, I mean, if you can do that on large scale, yes, you can make up the day length with artificial lighting. But I mean, that's not practical to do on a large scale. I mean, if you do a hectare with artificial lighting, I don't know how you're going to do that, but yes, you can definitely make up the day length by artificial lighting. And then a question by Rendani. What would the best onion be to plant in in a hot area like Limpopo, Venda? So let me just briefly discuss our varieties we have. So Sakata has a wide range of onion varieties. We have shorter onions and intermediate onions. So in the Limpopo, Venda area, you only be able to cultivate a shorter onion. You're not able to cultivate an intermediate onion. So our shorter onion varieties include our newest variety, Hoshi, which is a very nice mid-maturing shorter variety. We also have other shorter varieties, which are Senju and Akamaru. And these varieties, all of these varieties have intermediate resistance to the soil-borne pathogen pink root, which is quite a large problem in South Africa. So just to briefly also discuss our intermediate day varieties, we have Ayoba, which is our premium variety produced in the Northern Cape and also in the Western Cape. And then we also, Ayoba is a more early intermediate day variety. So it is sowing from late April into May. And then we have a late short day variety, a mid to late intermediate day variety, which is Perez. Perez is cultivated in the Northern Cape and the Western Cape. Sowing starts in June. So I noted there's another question that asks if we have varieties that has the same quality attributes to the onions produced in the Western Cape. Well, like I mentioned, the Western Cape, you can produce shorter onions and intermediate onions, and then also Pukekohe type onions. So a large portion of the Western Cape produces Pukekohe type onions. These onions have a very long storage ability, a very nice brown skin. So yes, we do have a intermediate onions which we can grow in the Free State. That was the question. That has the same attributes to those Pukekohe types. These varieties, like I mentioned, these Ayoba and Perez. Both Ayoba and Perez has a very nice brown scale leaf, have very nice firm bulbs, and they also have a very good storage ability. Some of our farmers in Northern Cape store the Ayoba for 6 months under proper storage conditions. So yes, we do have intermediate onions which can be cultivated in the in the Free State province with the quality attributes of the Pukekohe types onions of the Western Cape. Okay, and then there just came in another question. Good day, what would be suggested for planting in Northwest Potchefstroom? So once again, that would be a shorter onion. You can take any of the Sakata shorter varieties for work in this area. Hoshi is our new variety, and I would recommend that you plant Hoshi. The sowing time for this area would be February to March, and you don't want to do sowing prior to that, and as that can induce you're gonna have your onion is gonna bulb prematurely, so you're not gonna have a good yield, and you don't want to sow later than that, as your onion might bulb, and you're gonna produce thick necks on your onions. All right, that's everything from my side then. Thank you for tuning in, and please do visit our website, www.sakata.co.za, for any contact details, variety information, and please don't hesitate to contact me on regards with any questions on onions, carrots, beetroots, radishes, turnips, or bunching onions. Thank you for your time and have a nice day.